Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Anyone with even a modicum of government experience understands this cardinal rule. You don't broadcast military operations over an open source channel like Signal. And yet, there's our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegsethive, whose chief qualification for the job was his previous tenure as a weekend host on Fox News, blithely ignoring protocol and transmitting a real-time account of an attack on Houthi militants. 12:15 ET, F-18s launch, and tomahawks on target to a Signal chat group that included the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Director of National Intelligence, the CIA Director, and Jeffrey Goldberg, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic. Confronted with his colossal screw-up, Hegsethive lashed out at Goldberg as deceitful and insisted, against all reason, that he had shared no war plans in the chat, apparently hanging his defense on a gossamer and unexplained distinction between war plans and military operations. He stuck to his story, or something close to it, even as the news exploded and Democrats began calling for his resignation. By week's end, both the president and the attorney general were downplaying the breach, which experts have told me is the most serious in U.S. history, as inconsequential, and were signaling their intent to smother any FBI investigation, an inquiry that in any other administration would be routine. Meanwhile, Trump continued his relentless push for breathtaking executive overreach, this week spanning education, the legal profession, immigration, labor, and voting rights. Courts, for the most part, continued to swat him down. In the most closely watched case of the week, the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit declined to lift Judge Jeb Boasberg's restraining order, blocking the administration in a case involving the detention and transportation of over 200 alleged members of a transnational drug gang from the United States to a notoriously brutal prison in El Salvador. To work through a week in which the administration tried to control an emerging scandal with the classic Trumpian strategy of act as if nothing's wrong and blame the messenger, we welcome three of the country's most respected writers and journalists. And they are Alisyn Camerota, an award-winning journalist and author. She was the longtime anchor of CNN's morning show. Throughout her 3 decades in journalism, Alisyn has covered stories around the world, earning 2 Emmy Awards. Her latest book is Combat Love, and her even more recent Substack is under her name, Alisyn Camerota. That is Alisyn with a Y, y'all. Alisyn. And it's a really fun and informative Substack that I've both listened to and joined. Alisyn Camerota, good to see you.
You're the best. Thank you for all of that. Great to be here.
David French, it's been a little bit too long, an opinion columnist with the New York Times. I guess that's still around, right?
Yeah, we're there, clinging to the news business by our fingernails.
All right. A former JAG officer deployed to Iraq in 2007. He earned a Bronze Star with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Thank you for your service. Since transitioning from full-time law practice to join National Review in 2015, he's been a really prominent voice in American politics, especially addressing growing polarization, including through his book, Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation. Welcome back to Talking Feds.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm so happy to be here.
And Jonathan Alter, an award-winning author, filmmaker, columnist, MSNBC political analyst. He's authored books about FDR, Barack Obama, and of course, Jimmy Carter. And most recently, the felony trial of Donald Trump, which he's taken on the road now to New Orleans, and where I sat side by side with him to observe the proceedings. In 2021, he launched a newsletter, Old Goats Ruminating with Friends, that's devoted to tapping the wisdom and experience of some remarkably accomplished guests.
Thanks for having me, Harry.
Okay, let's start with the burgeoning scandal. I think I can say that objectively over the transmission of military operation details on a signal chat that actually went to a journalist who wasn't supposed to be in the circle. We're not experts on national security, but we've all lived through other important security breaches by government actors. Robert Hansen, Aldrich Ames, maybe Edward Snowden. What's your sense of the gravity of the leak, which the White House is striving hard to call, no big deal?
I think it's huge. You say burgeoning scandal. I don't know how this wouldn't be a scandal, but it's not a scandal in right-wing circles because they're so busy doing cleanup on aisle 9 on behalf of the administration. So I think it's a huge scandal. Now, in terms of how dangerous, I mean, they dodged a bullet. So obviously the Houthis were not on that signal channel. Thank God. However, that doesn't forgive the recklessness and the utter disregard for rules and for standards. And it all trickles down, of course, from the top. Leadership is set at the top. And the fact that Donald Trump is so careless and so sloppy has an effect on his cabinet, and it has an effect on all of the people around him. And then for him to say, I don't know anything about it, you should ask those guys. That's leadership. That's what passes for leadership nowadays, as opposed to this was a screw up, the buck stops with me. I mean, it's very insulting, obviously, and it's very hard to hear that so many people imbued him with leadership. All of this was very juvenile. The language was like a frat house language. It was all like just something that adolescent boys would be bantering back and forth. Fist bump, go America, muscle flex. Yeah, all of that stuff is so non-presidential and doesn't feel like grown-ups in the room. I think it's a huge scandal, but I guess it wasn't dangerous because the Houthis didn't manage to hack into the signal chat.
Let me add one thing, which is I spoke with Malcolm Nance, who spent most of his career with the headphones on and doing communications. He not only calls this the most serious breach in U.S. History, but he thinks could well have been very damaging, even if the Houthis weren't there. Of course, that's why it's heart-stopping. That this is what intelligence people have tried to do since time immemorial. One if by land or two if by sea. You bring your folks in, and the other side is ready for them. But as Malcolm explained, each of these people are so high up. They have an entire department in Russia or China devoted to them, and he thinks they've been able to squeeze out a lot. Not to mention, at least in Russia, you have some guy's phone, you got everything in there and possibly everything on other people's phone. So they may have been able to mine information well in excess of just what was transmitted.
David, as a veteran, knows this better than I do, but I've been looking in the last couple of days at the history, the global history, 3, 4, 5,000 years of history, maybe 2,000. My next book is on Julius Caesar, so I've been spending a lot of time in the first century BCE. But the timing of a military invasion is the single most valuable piece of intelligence in human history. If you were making a list of what is high grade intelligence, timing is central. And the time of the D-Day invasion, to use a more modern example, when will it be launched?
And the location. A lot of speculation on
the time and location. So the idea that this was not highly, highly classified or should have been highly classified is preposterous. And it's quite true that if Iranian intelligence had been listening, and as was just mentioned, anything on a cell phone can be heard. They're just, by definition, cell phones are not secure, right? So the idea that Iranian intelligence would alert the Houthis that an invasion was coming is just by the grace of God that didn't happen. and that they didn't turn their anti-aircraft on these American pilots. So it's just dumb luck. And by the way, dumb is an important word in this conversation. Just dumb luck that that operation didn't turn into a disaster. And so this idea that, oh, this is not as bad as what Hillary Clinton did, which is what Pam Bondi said, preposterous, outrageous, offensive, and contrary to anybody who knows anything about the history of warfare.
You know, one thing about this, I would say, is we're focusing a lot on the attack plans for a very good reason. I mean, as Jonathan was saying, in the right circumstances, they could have not just deployed air defenses. They have air defenses. They're not that sophisticated. They not merely could have deployed air defenses. They could have moved the targets to safety. They could have launched missiles against Navy shipping to try to preempt the attack. They could have launched missiles against allies. There's all kinds of things they could have done. But that's not the only thing that was a problem here. You know, I was talking to some of the folks that I've worked with in the past and people who've been involved in these kinds of decision-making processes. And he says, look, you have no idea how comprehensive this breach was. I mean, even the name of the chat group would normally be something that would be classified. The composition of the chat group would be classified. The conversations preceding the strike, preceding Hegsethive disclosing details of the strike, that would have been highly classified. So all of this is one big ball of sensitive information. The other thing that's important about this is there is at least plausible evidence that somebody has committed a crime here, because this is something that we learned from the Hillary Clinton investigation and other investigations, that when national security information is removed from its proper place of custody and it is put through gross negligence in an improper place, that's a federal crime. And it doesn't just apply to classified information, it applies to information pertaining to the national defense. So even if the administration wants to argue this wasn't classified, they cannot argue that it wasn't information pertaining to the national defense. And then the last turn of this that I think is really, really important is just to illustrate how comprehensively this administration is abandoning standards. Even if you have problems with how the Hillary Clinton email situation was ultimately worked out, as I do, the fact was she was still under FBI investigation. Sandy Berger, when he took classified documents from the National Archives, was prosecuted. General Petraeus, when he shared classified information with his mistress, was prosecuted. Joe Biden, when there was classified information found in his garage, he was subject to a special counsel investigation initiated by his own Department of Justice. Okay, that's how it is done. Here, Pam Bondi dismisses the idea of an investigation and then flips it back onto Hillary Clinton, who, by the way, went through an investigation. We all remember the Comey press conference where he talked about what he found. And even though there were not charges filed, I would argue that but for this press conference, but for that investigation, she's highly likely to have been president. So what we're talking about is far more than just the attack plans. What we're talking about is a fundamental abandonment of standards on the front end and accountability on the back end. By the way, right after they'd fired a bunch of generals for no real reason at all, other than political alignment. So if you're out of political alignment, your career is tenuous. But if you're hyper MAGA, as Pete Hegsethive is, it appears that there's just not much you can do that would cause you to lose your job. It's unbelievably corrupting.
Let me jump in as a lawyer here and say a few things. First, David French, this is 8 exclamation points. Look, Espionage Act 793F, this stuff is so serious that if you are grossly negligent and somebody gets it, that's a crime. Same gravity of crime as Trump was charged with in Mar-a-Lago, for starters. But for second, the possibility that any administration, R or D, wouldn't already have a file open that says 793F on it and Hegsethive is zero. It's just mind-boggling to think that there wouldn't be an investigation. And what it says, as you've indicated, about how much in the tank she is, talk about, justice without fear or favor. It's breathtaking to even suggest that this not be investigated, including because you're worried about future harm other people were acting. So that's a real stunner. Maybe we'll get back to it. I just want to follow on quickly with Alisyn's point of, it's really true when you read Hegsethive, obviously, he's got no experience, chip on his shoulder, and his transmissions to me were trying to be one of the boys, kind of, oh, Niner, we're coming in, but, and giving out those details a little bit like the amateur that he is. And then, of course, finally, the whole use of signals seems to have been as long-standing as this as Hegsethive is, and B, precisely to evade the law because it doesn't preserve records as is required under the Presidential Records Act.
So this is just a footnote from a historian, spent so many weeks and months in presidential libraries, that they're trying to not just cover their tracks, but eliminate any historical record. I mean, like when I was writing about Carter, I was looking at Situation Room conversations that have been declassified, and I get a sense on how they responded to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This is what historians depend on. They're basically flushing our history because the president has a bone to pick with the National Archives, and because they're too lazy to go to SCIFs, which they all have in their homes and have pretty ready access to in many parts of the world, to protect the integrity of their conversations. SCIFs are the secure rooms where they're, by law, supposed to be talking about classified information. And it's not that they would all, like, if after investigation, that they'd all like go to jail, because there was something inadvertent about this. They didn't know. They were too ignorant, stupid to know that they shouldn't be doing this. So in that sense, there are some resemblances to the Hillary Clinton situation where, she should have known. Joe Biden should have known not to put those documents in his garage. There's some leeway in this. And there's also a double standard where lower ranking officials are sent to jail and higher ranking ones are not.
Although, quick legal interjection, if it's published under F, even if you're just grossly negligent, crime, felony.
Yeah, but it's like a basic function of the unfairness that's built into the system that over the last period of time, even if it includes Sandy Berger, who was prosecuted. But they don't throw the book at you if you're a high-ranking official. You basically close to skate. And I mean, which high-ranking official who's violated any of these laws has ever gone to jail? None.
They've lost their careers completely.
Yes, and they've lost their security. But we have people in jail right now for long terms who've done something much less egregious than this.
One more thing, Harry, I just want to say in terms of dodging a bullet, that, this was able to go off, it appears, without a hitch. We don't know what the lasting repercussions will be. So
100%. We may never know. Go ahead. Yeah.
Our allies don't trust us now. And they are sharing, all the intelligence sharing that our allies have willingly done and that we've agreed to through various agreements. They're reluctant to do that now. And why would they? So we might not dodge a bullet in the next one because we won't have gotten the intelligence.
This is a huge point, Alisyn, and that I don't think has gotten enough attention in the last few days. We don't gather all of this intelligence ourselves. In fact, most of it is gathered by foreign intelligence agencies with whom we have good relationships. So this is a potentially crippling blow to our intelligence.
And our adversaries can probably figure out what came from where. Let me just ask you, what bullshit are they trying to peddle? Do we think there was some kind of little quick Trumpian, I hereby declassify you? Or, is there something important that they're hiding in being able to say this?
I think what's happening is essentially they're trying to say because it wasn't marked classified, it's not classified.
Give me an effing break.
Right. But we're not the audience for this. We're not the audience. All that is necessary for them is they have to give MAGA words, okay? And here are the words, not classified. Here's another set of words, Hillary Clinton. And so none of this is about actually presenting a credible explanation to the American people. All of this is about giving talking points to the base to stay on side. Because remember, these folks do not think in terms of persuasion. They don't think in terms of winning an actual argument. What they think in terms of is exercising power. And how do they exercise power? They've learned that they can exercise all the power that they want as long as they keep their base on side. And so that's what this is. This is not a good faith argument about doing this the right way. This is talking points. And then also part of the MAGA ethos is never apologize, never admit wrongdoing. And so in a weird way, the actual thing, the culture that they have built in MAGA is so toxic and defiant that if they actually apologized, they see this as hurting them more than if they just stick to their guns and fight the media and fight Jeffrey Goldberg. But that's the calculus. We just have to totally look at the Trump administration as something different from every other administration that I've experienced that actually cares about winning public arguments. They do not. They care about keeping the base on side. That is the sum total of the messaging strategy.
But here's the problem with that. And I think we tend to get intimidated by what you just said, which is all true. But where political power ultimately resides is with independents, in this case, reluctant Trump voters who are not part of the base. Like, I think Carville was wrong in saying, just let them sink. We don't have to do anything. I think Schumer was sort of echoing that a little bit. I don't agree with that. I think we need to resist as hard as we can across a very broad front. But it is true that if a president goes down below 35%, say roughly, he has a lot less leverage and his ability to intimidate people is significantly diminished. So this is the hope that with his idiotic economic policies, he will, drive his popularity down and that he won't be as intimidating and threatening as he is right now, and that the sharpness of the spear of the MAGA base will be dulled at least somewhat. It obviously won't be, the threat from MAGA won't be eliminated. They will still have tremendous power because of the way they roll, but that we can get into a place where people are not as intimidated as, say, the managing partner of Paul Weiss.
Let me try to thread the needle between what David just said and what Jonathan just said. Remember in 1951, when he pardoned all the January 6th offenders? I mean, the shock and awe has made things disappear quickly. 74% of Americans in a quick poll consider the chat leak to be a serious issue. Will they genuinely step in it when they reach an issue that, as Jonathan says, really does, appall is too strong a word, but concern, independents who voted for him? Or, is it as long as you just keep the however many percent it is on board, literally, it doesn't matter. And another way to put it, I serve this up to all of you politically, but will we be talking about this very issue in the midterms?
No.
No.
Oh, God, no.
No way.
Because
No way.
it just goes away. I mean, he set it up. This whole flood the zone chaos theory principle is that it just, goes away. Everybody's attention span just goes away. Now, if the tables were turned when Joe Biden ever did anything or Hillary Clinton, Fox hit it every single segment, every single day. And that was their strategy because they're not a news channel. So they can do whatever, propaganda they want. So they would just hit it over. They came up with a nickname for it. There would be a shorthand. They would hit it over and over from Fox and Friends to Hannity. But, other news moves on.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that. And Democrats don't know how to drive a message. This will not only not be a major issue in the midterms, it'll be gone in a week to 10 days. It's kind of amazing that it's lasted as long as it has. But
any firings, Jonathan?
God, no. God, no. He'd have to admit he did something wrong.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg gets fired.
Yeah.
But where I think there's a caveat is that what happens with presidents, any president, and the reason that second-term presidents are famously unsuccessful is that they get a lot of mileage on their presidency. The odometer, there's damage over time. So take this example. So no, it will not be a tier one issue in the midterms. Definitely not. But there are a certain number of, say, veterans, people who pay attention to national security issues, who voted for Trump, and yet this appalls them, right? And it doesn't turn them into a flaming Democrat. It doesn't make them like Chuck Schumer anymore, but it certainly takes a little bit of the shine off Trump. Now, there were a certain number of veterans, and David can speak to this better than I can, who, when Jeffrey Goldberg's last big story, which was about Trump dissing veterans, which was a pretty big deal when that story came out. We forget about the votes that Harris got. She lost by 1.5%. So there were quite a number of veterans who they got off Trump at that point, right? Now, but maybe there were others who didn't get off Trump at that point because they think that John Kelly is not to be believed in what he says or whatever their rationalization is. But now, this one they've actually seen in a different way. It was admitted to by Trump, so there's nothing alleged about it. They might, react differently. Now, is that enough to give the House to the Democrats? No. But what it does is incrementally, and if you take a wide variety of other issues, like he hasn't done anything about the price of eggs, and you add them all up, I do have a strong feeling that Donald Trump is going to be less popular a year and a half from now than he is right now. And he's not very popular now, despite the success of his intimidation.
There's another little twist here that has, I think, some implications for accountability. And that is, this is actually in some ways not a Trump scandal as much as it's a Hegsethive scandal. And so that means that there isn't the same base loyalty in play. Now, if this was a Trump scandal, if Trump was on this chat or something, then in a weird way, it might actually be easier for them to navigate because it would implicate Trump. And if something implicates Trump, then there's an automatic rally around the orange flag, right? But this is Hegsethive, and there isn't the same. The affection for Hegsethive only exists insofar as Trump mirrors it, reflects it, magnifies it. And so if there is a real sense that Hegsethive is a problem, Trump will toss these folks immediately. But what's keeping, I think, them in the tent, what's keeping them in the camp, is that they have done a very effective job. Again, when I say effective job, I'm not talking about us as their audience. I'm talking about the Fox, Newsmax, OAN audience. They've been doing a very effective job of exactly mimicking how Trump would respond to something like this. Just exactly.
Hegsethive immediately trashes Goldberg and basically says it's a lie. It was like he's, really taking notes from the master there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know that Hegsethive was a pillar of responsibility and accountability before he joined the administration.
We forget that whole background too, right? How he was the most unqualified nominee in history.
Hegsethive, for anybody except the hardcore base, came across horribly. And then they said, well, there's no classified information. So Jeff Goldberg, who's handled this quite well throughout, he releases stuff that is obvious, way worse than the initial release, extending the story another few days. And, they have political problems. What happens is people are easily cowed by bullies. And look at what Trump just did in pulling Elise Stefanik's nomination for UN ambassador. That was a really significant tweet when he explained that. He basically said, we're not sure we can hold that seat. So we need her to run again for the House, right? To stay in the House, no special election. If she had become UN ambassador, they would have had a special election. She won last November by 15 points. And they are worried that in a special election this summer, the Republican would lose. That shows that they're seeing a lot of very bad internal polling that shows serious erosion in their position. And instead of, being a bunch of craven knee benders, these managing partners of law firms and college presidents should sue them, fight them, do anything they can to fight them, because they're on the way down. And instead, they're reacting with cowardice. And it's I think, one of the most discouraging things that's happened all year or this year so far, is not so much what Trump has done, which has just been autocracy on an accelerated basis, maybe faster than people expected, but just the utter cravenness of those who he targets.
Yeah, it certainly enabled it. The last two people, two big ones, Jenner Block, Wilmer Hale, are both suing, but they're put in a very bad position either way. All right, enough said for now. And I'm discouraged, but also a little bit surprised that you guys think this is over in 10 days. But, I respect your views. So given the gravity of this, that would be one more sort of Houdini move on his part. All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we look at 3 different techniques for making rosé wine to see if there's truly a best way to rosé. First, rosé is a type of wine that's actually produced quite similarly to reds, but the fermentation time of the grape is reduced, giving rosé its signature pink color. The first technique for making rosé is the skin contact method, in which black-skinned grapes such as Pinot Noir are crushed but allowed to remain in contact with the juice for a short period of time. After about 6 to 48 hours, as opposed to weeks or months for the reds, the skins are separated. This method is most frequently used in the top rosé-producing region of the world, Provence, and throughout the south of France. The second method is called saignée, which is the French word for bleeding. This method creates both a rosé and a red wine. Early in the maceration process, some of the pink juice created from the grape must is removed to make the rosé, while the remaining juice becomes a more concentrated red. A rosé made from this method tends to be richer and darker in both color and fruit flavor. This method is more rarely used, but it can be found more often in rosés from Spain, Napa, and Chile. The third method is blending. Contrary to what some people think, blending is not just a 50-50 pour of red and white wine. Instead, blending is where a white grape, such as Chardonnay, is blended with a red grape, and it's the most popular way to make a rosé champagne. Although popular in Champagne, this method is used in still rosés as well. In fact, some winemakers in Provence choose to blend small percentages of white grape varieties into their rosés. It's not always obvious or easy to know which method was used to make a particular rosé, but the expert guides at Total Wine and More can help you navigate our wondrous selection to find a rosé that makes your day. So find what you love and love what you find, only at Total Wine and More. Cheers!
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's A Spirited Debate. Let's move to the white-hot legal and policy dispute involving his efforts to just take members of the Tren de Aragua drug organization who were in the United States. So it's been going on for a while. Let's just start with the Alien Enemies Act that says basically if we're at war or a predatory invasion by a foreign nation, you can deport non-citizens of the hostile nation. We've invoked it only 3 times. War of 1812, World War I, World War II. Is there any even straight-faced argument that this is what the statute's for, that he's acting on legitimate authority from 1798? What do you guys think about just the basic positioning of the administration here to use it?
I mean, this is a wartime authority. That's what it is. It has been invoked for the War of 1812, which was so dangerous to America that the capital was sacked by the British Army. World War I, obvious existential threat. World War II, obvious existential threat. And then we have a criminal gang from Venezuela. What?
Some members are sprinkled here, it seems.
One of these things is not like the other. I mean, this would be about like using war powers on the Gotti crime family. No one is saying that this Venezuelan gang isn't bad. No one is saying that criminal aliens shouldn't be deported. But this idea that we're going to invoke a wartime authority, and by the way, when you evoke a wartime authority, you're evoking a wartime authority. So essentially what the administration is saying in the courts is that we get to do this. It is a political question. It's not a justiciable issue. In other words, it's not something that courts should even be able to opine on. And then we've, in essence, declared a wartime authority. And then whatever we do under that authority, they're going to say is legally fine, whether it includes sweeping up people off the streets who have autism awareness tattoos and saying that that's a Venezuelan gang tattoo, as you know, we've seen reports of one case. They're going to do it. But it's very important, I think, for American people to realize when you invoke a wartime authority and you're invoking it, as someone told me the other day who was defending it, well, they want to deport people faster. There are a lot of ways to deport people faster without invoking wartime authorities. When you evoke wartime authorities, in many ways, you're moving out of what we would consider to be conventional law. And then the only real law that it begins to apply in a true wartime authority situation becomes the laws of war, which are very, very different, right? And so the idea that a Venezuelan gang is a threat to the United States and anything like the British Army in the 1812, the Imperial German Army, or Nazi Germany, much less Imperial Japan, is fantastically ridiculous. But once again, the only audience he has to persuade on this, at least in his mind, is the audience is already convinced that America is under essentially in conditions of invasion right now.
During World War II, you guys may have visited this place in Montauk where the saboteurs came ashore. The idea that they would be deprived of due process, even in the middle of the war, these Nazis got their day in court. Due process is bedrock for our system. And this is the constitutional injury, serious injury of depriving people of due process. Now, did Abraham Lincoln suspend habeas corpus briefly during the Civil War? Yes. Did he quite quickly go to Congress for authorization? Yes. Were many of their due process rights fairly quickly restored? Yes. These folks don't even believe in due process. We're beyond being in a constitutional crisis. You know, we haven't even started talking about the found court orders, which is the other part of the story that is terrifying. We are in the midst of an attempted change in the constitutional order. Crises are of short duration. They have 4 years to pursue their agenda of changing the fundamentals of our system. And they're doing it in a surprisingly aggressive and unfortunately effective way.
But the German saboteurs, it wasn't pretty. Roosevelt sort of pushed things through, but they got process, and Merriman or whoever's involved in Lincoln, there's no doubt they were the right people. We have this ultimate horror lurking here of people who are not in the group being just disappeared forever into a torture chamber.
Well, a couple of points. The human point can't be underestimated. What you're talking about, Harry, it is if you start to imagine what this means for people who are, again, unadjudicated, not gang members. They have the wrong tattoo, and they're sent into a black hole of a prison, a violent prison, where, I mean, they'll be subjected to violence, inhuman acts, and no court case. It's so darkly Kafkaesque. It's almost too awful to think about. And so the cruelty here is a tell. It tells you that this has nothing to do with a wartime, this is some 1798 law that they're just pulling that out of thin air, basically. Like, it's the cruelty. Look at how strong we are because we're going to crack down on, these so-called gang members. And I mean, we already know from journalists that some of them have no criminal record. They have no criminal record, and they are, as you say, vanishing into a black hole. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is that if we're on a war footing, if that's the new rule, if now we can use wartime rules and wartime laws, well, then you can also cancel elections. Like, it's just as plain as the nose in your face. If that's what we're getting everybody used to, oh, we use wartime rules now. Well, I guess, I'm so comforted when I hear smart people, like you guys be like, we've got 4 years to figure this out. I hope so.
See, I have a problem with that. I hear that everywhere I go. They're going to cancel elections. He's not going to leave office. There are real things to worry about. And canceled elections. Okay, so their playbook is from Hungary and Turkey, Russia. Now, there's serious question about whether we're going to have free and fair elections, but there will be elections. They have them in Russia, and they had elections during the Civil War, and Lincoln was worried he's going to lose the 1864 election. So, there is no precedent for actually canceling elections. It's just not the way they're rolling. They don't have to. He just signed an executive order, which is probably not going to go anywhere, corrupting elections, saying you have to have an ID that shows you're a citizen. So they'll be doing a lot of that kind of thing. Although even that, considering how much support he has from Hispanics who are citizens, might not be in his political interest to pursue this. And also on the 22nd Amendment, he has no process for overturning the 22nd Amendment.
He has no process for anything.
No, he actually does. So take the layoffs, right? All these Musk layoffs. They've been of probationary federal employees who either have been recently hired or recently promoted. In the latter category, it's the horror of it is brought into more relief because these are some of the best people who've been recently promoted who have now been fired. But the reason they did that is that if they had not started with that, they would have been in clear violation of the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 and the Reduction in Force Act of 1992. So they do have lawyers, right? And their lawyers are trying to craft arguments that might pass muster with the Supreme Court.
Although just this morning they issued a far-reaching labor order that seems to me to be a patent violation of the CSRA. And, I don't think they're holding back now.
I appreciate everything Jonathan's saying, and I want cooler heads to prevail for sure, but nothing he said comforted me. Basically, It doesn't comfort me when you hold up Hungary and Russia as an example of how its elections aren't going to be canceled.
Well, I didn't mean it to be comforted. I'm not comforted by anything, but it's important to understand the form of illiberal government, to use Fareed Zakaria's term. So illiberal democracy, I don't use anymore because there's nothing democratic about it.
Right.
And I don't even like the formulation because illiberal, like normal people can't understand that. But modern day authoritarianism, they don't cancel elections. And so we take our eye off the ball. He's not going to execute people at Chap Chap Square like in Riyadh, okay?
It's the legal model. It's a point well taken.
Yeah, okay.
There's a danger in crying wolf on certain things that are not going to happen. It takes our eye off extremely serious things that are happening right now.
All right, let me come in with a point of lawyer's privilege and try to, such a rare role for me, comfort my suffering friends, it was actually, the only thing that's held pretty well so far has been the courts. Over 100 suits, something like 80 injunctions. That's the district court level. And the real concern is what happens as it goes up. And on just this point, the Alien Enemies Act, a great opinion authored by a Republican who was silent in oral argument. You knew she would be the pivotal vote. It's a Trump judge, an Obama judge, and her Judge Henderson, a George H.W. Bush appointee. And she knocked it out of the park, not just on the point that you got to be able to have judicial review of are you one of them or not, but the point of, the ridiculous assertion that this is a predatory incursion by a foreign country. That's what it's got to be under the AEA. That was a good day for the one guardrail that's not only holding, but really responding kind of as they're designed and with a lot of virtue, even as the MAGA crowd is calling for their impeachments and worse. I wanted to end just with all of our thoughts, but provoked by you, David, and your recent New York Times piece, just about 2 months now, lots happened, but the state of the republic, you highlighted the sort of raw, visceral animosity that now defines American politics. Republicans and Democrats like despising one another, and this dynamic of Republicans kind of, it's more than even wanting to win, but almost relishing the suffering of grinding, the Democrats' face in the dust, etc. We are seeing among Republicans some buyer's remorse. It's mainly driven by the economy. But is this factor you've identified, this sort of third grade brainstem kind of revenge, so strong that, $10 eggs won't defeat it?
Oh, it's stronger than $10 eggs. It's certainly stronger, I think, than any given individual kind of crisis. It is not stronger than a collective sense of decay and decline. The base is with him. They're just with him. I mean, we saw this in 2020 when we had chaos in the streets. We had sickness at home. We had a brief period of economic collapse. It was terrible in 2020, and the election was still very close. I mean, we had a historic murder spike, all of those things occurring, and it was enough for Joe Biden to win. It was not enough for his base to leave him. And the base will not ever leave him. I was actually having lunch today with somebody who's like me, a dissenting conservative. And I said, well, I think one thing that people are missing is Trump is following sometimes as much as he's leading. And that in this sense, that one of the things that bonded him to the base to begin with is he was the only politician on the Republican side that could match their anger. So they felt a bond with him that they did not feel with the others, even if he was kind of wild ideologically, wild in his personal life, this unbelievable animosity. They saw that in him. He sees that in them as well, and they feed it in each other. And so I think one thing, again, if you're living outside of this right-wing bubble, you would look at all this chaotic start and say, nobody wants this, right? No, who wants this kind of blunt instrument, bull in a china shop, or to use the John Mulaney skit? I don't know if you ever saw The Horse in the Hospital. Who wants the horse in the hospital? And then all these Republicans raise their hand and say, I want the horse in the hospital as long as its hooves are trampling the people I hate. And so the danger, I think, in all of this, the sledgehammer approach as opposed to the scalpel approach, actually, if they were more competent, they would have more runway as long as they were using their animosity in a scalpel fashion just to carve out all of the people that MAGA hates. But they're so broad brush, they're firing MAGA people. And there are people who have Trump flags in their yards who are being summarily fired. And that is radiating out a bit. I am having some people say, my daughter's grant was canceled, or my nephew lost his job. And these kinds of things have an impact in a way that nothing they see from New York Times, nothing they see on Twitter or anything else, these things have an impact that nothing else does. And I think a big question is just how much will this kind of filter through the body politics?
And look at Social Security, when they started talking about closing offices and making it harder for seniors, 25% of whom don't have computers, to call the Social Security offices. All these Republican members started hearing about it from their constituents, and they're now starting to back off. So the feedback loop has not been entirely obliterated in this country. And I think it's also really important to avoid despair, because when people curl up in fetal position, they win. And what's encouraging to me is you do see a lot of grassroots opposition starting, and it's not just paid Democrats, as Trump called them, paid agitators. It's true that some of them are the usual suspects, even in red districts, but it feels like it's getting bigger than that. And that's something that, if Trump responds to with violence, responds to too harshly, instead of that enhancing his power, that could hurt his power. So in my first book, I wrote about the bonus army. And, Roosevelt felt in 1932 that Hoover lost the election when he had, called out the army to go after these Americans who were peacefully protesting. So there are real potential roadblocks for Trump that I think sometimes don't get enough attention. I just came before this from a session at the New Orleans Book Festival where David Axelrod and Karl Rove were on stage, and Rove was, I wouldn't say concerned because he doesn't like Trump at all, but his analysis was that Trump is about to have some real political problems for some of the reasons that David just mentioned.
I agree with you guys, particularly when we're looking at what's happening in the town halls in the red districts. So those aren't Democratic plans. I mean, that anger that you're seeing in the town halls directed at the Republican House members, to the point where the House members have to flee. Well, they don't have to flee, but they're choosing to leave the room. Those are real people who are really concerned about what Elon Musk is doing and about the oligarchy and about the kleptocracy and about how it's going to affect their life. I mean, things are already happening. And so I agree. I think that there was a feeling of Democrats and people of good conscience had to turn away. It was all too much when Trump won, affecting their kind of mental health. And people are re-engaging. And particularly, as you guys say, the people for whom there's already real world effects. So I agree. I mean, now is no time to lose hope and not to be optimistic. And certainly it's no time to disengage. And I do think we're seeing some little saplings of some of that protest taking root.
Can I say something, though, about some of the people who listen to this great podcast, a lot of whom are lawyers? So I think that this is the character test of our generation, and it's binary. It's pass fail. It's which side are you on it, and it's very clarifying. So if you're the managing partner of a law firm and you are faced with ridiculous demands like Skadden Arps represented somebody who Dinesh D'Souza lied about in a film, in that Mules film that he did. And for the sin of representing this client, they're being treated the way a mob boss treats somebody who hasn't brought in enough of the vig. So the managing partner of any of these firms, they don't have to do this for the sake of the firm. They can resign as managing partner and make 3 million instead of 7 million, and let somebody else who has no principles and who is on the wrong side of this, who doesn't care about having to explain to their grandchildren why they bent the knee to Donald Trump, let that person do it. Same thing for anybody who he extorts or tries to intimidate. You have a choice. You can side with the money, or you can side with your principles and your character and the values that you claim to hold. And you can avoid all the elaborate rationalizations that everybody has for bending the knee and do the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, history is going to be harsh. This is the thing that I think a lot of them don't recognize. You think that Brad Karp is going to do well in history? He's a public-spirited liberal guy. He's going to have to explain someday, or his grandchildren are going to have to explain, why is Grandpa in the history books as a suppletant to Donald Trump?
Why is he listed under Quisling? No, it's really true. And I just want to add to it. There are prospective guys out there. And the really thing that's been missing, this is what he complained about himself, is collective action and people having the guts now where they're keeping their head down and praying they're not next, instead to band together. There are fledgling efforts to do that in the legal industry, I can tell you, but it's so needed. All right, we are very unfortunately out of time. What a great conversation and a great group. I hope you'll come back soon. We have 1 minute for our Talking Five feature. The question today: the original name of the Signal group chat, very creative, was Houthi PC Small Group. What would be a better name for the Signal group chat. 5 words or fewer, anyone.
I'm with stupid.
And 2 left over. Very good.
Well, as you know, I think that it was just a lot of sort of frat boy talk that I was hearing. So I've decided it should have been Alpha Tappa Kega Party.
Exactly. Bring Jaggermeister. Yeah, okay, David.
I thought they might be music fans, so it's Hooties and the Bombfish.
Oh my God.
You know, that's it. Nominations are closed. I can't even do mine now. Awesome. You're not really a conservative, are you? Okay. I'm going with a much more pedestrian feature. Nobody here but us leakers. Thank you so much, Jonathan, Alisyn, and David. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack at Talking Feds Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, breaking down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law, which seem only to be accelerating and getting ever more serious. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so your support and nothing else funds all of our franchises. And Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this bold new media venture, committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we've joined forces with The Contrarian, but we are still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust. Just now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. You can find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Don Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamsam Hadranathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.